Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another random review. Today's random review is Season 3 of Monty Python's Flying Circus. Again, this is the From the Network releasing box set. So again, each season has a fairly substantial viewing notes book, as well as obviously the 2 discs. Inside, again, these are available also in a standard Blu-ray edition, and if you're a fan of Monty Python, they are essential because the prints are absolutely beautiful. As I've said in the previous 2 videos, the prints are, it's just the best that's ever looked. So again, very much like a bad Monty Python sketch, I'm going to have to use my notes because there's quite a lot to get through. I would say this season, like most of the seasons, are uneven. There's a kind of sense of at times they're repeating themselves, and obviously this would be John Cleese's last season because he felt they were repeating themselves too much, and obviously the series would only last one more season. So this is from 1972. So the first episode has different titles. It's Michael Palin saying Monty Python's Flying Circus rather than John Cleese. So episode 1 starts with Njorl's saga, an Icelandic tale which kind of never gets started at the beginning of the episode. And then it goes into a wonderful murder trial of a serial killer who ends up getting off with it because he goes into this huge big speech about how sorry he is. Then we kind of go back to Njorl's saga, which turns into a kind of town advert, and then we have a little stock market report, which again is just silly and ridiculous, but you can see the influence on Chris Morris's Day to Day, which pretty much lifted the whole thing with Calately Sisters giving a stock market report. Then there's a nice joke about somebody's taking 4 hours to bury the cat, and the person asks 4 hours to bury the cat. Yeah, because they wouldn't keep still. And then we have the Wives of Philosophers, and then it finishes up with Wicker's Island, which is just an island full of Alan Wickers. Again, younger audiences wouldn't know who Alan Wicker is, but again, that's what the viewing notes are for. So I'd say the first episode isn't that great. The second episode isn't really that great either. It's about schoolboys who are also F1 drivers and gynecologists. They do have a very nice spoof of Blue Peter called How to Do It. So it's stuff like, how to avert communism and things like that. They have a farming club special on Tchaikovsky. There's stuff about, there's an ongoing joke about BBC budgets aren't very high. Sets get taken away in the middle of sketches. And Lulu and Ringo Starr, if you remember them, make a guest appearance on the It's Man chat show, but as soon as he says it's, the credits come up pretty much. So again, it's not a great start to the series, has to be said. But then episode 3 picks up with a money programme special, which leads into Eric Idle's Money Song, which is one of the best songs they ever did, about various currencies and pretty much about capitalism. There's a period piece of Elizabeth I with speech impediments, which is actually fairly foreshadowing the Biggest Dickus stuff from Life of Brian. And again, you have somebody impersonating Visconti. There's a few art house film directors that get mentioned in this season, has to be said. So you have Terry Jones impersonating Visconti. We have appearance by the church police. We have a jungle restaurant scene. Several of the actors are in blackface during this season. We have Ken Russell's gardening club. We have The Lost World, about a lost expedition, and then it has a running gag of, if they're lost, who's actually filming them, and then it pans back to a film crew, and then who's filming the film crew, and then who's filming the film crew that's filming the film crew. And then it ends with one of their classic sketches, one of the best they've ever did, which is the argument sketch, which is just so good. It's the idea of paying for an argument. There's a room for abuse, a room for complaints. Again, this foreshadows, sex chat phone lines. It foreshadows lots of things, and it is one of their best sketches. Palin and Cleese are just absolutely wonderful in it, and that leads on to a room where Terry Jones hits you over the head and teaches you how to say ow when you've been hit over the head. Again, Antonioni gets a mention as well. That's one of the best episodes of the season. And then we have episode 4, where there's a man who speaks in anagrams. Again, an ongoing theme that they've had with wordplay. And we have a great scene with John Cleese as a merchant banker, and Terry Jones is asking for £1 for charity for the orphans, and he just doesn't understand the concept of giving money to charity, which of course is still relevant to merchant bankers today and over the years. The concept of charity is like, what do I actually get out of it? And it's like making children happy, and it's like, no, still don't understand. We have a series of life and death struggles narrated by a German, John Cleese. For example, the life and death struggle of an ant and a wolf. And this is where a pantomime dummy version of Princess Margaret is introduced and makes appearances through the series. There's a life and death struggle of a couple of pantomime horses. Again, this episode is patchy, but has moments of genius, which again, if you're familiar with Monty Python, is a running theme. The next episode starts with a summarised Proust competition. Again, Monty Python did have that mix of highbrow material mixed with obviously lots of slightly more rude humour. We have Mount Everest climbed by hairdressers who open a salon. We have a nice animation of a magnificent festering. You'll recognise Anton Walbrook as one of the animated characters. We have the famous travel agent sketch where Eric Idle basically just gives a huge monologue about package tours and Torremolinos, and he does mention a waiter called Manuel. So obviously John Cleese might have been taking note for later use. Episode 6 starts with Gumby Brain Specialist, with the famous phrase, "My brain hurts." The sex life of mollusks. Cannibalism in the Royal Navy. And again, this leads to a long film section of an expedition to find Lake Tahoe. Episode 7 perhaps might be the best episode in the season. It has Climbing the Uxbridge Road. It has storage jars, which is reports from political hotspots, for example, Bolivia, but it just asks what they use in storage jars. And it's obviously a satire on how the news doesn't really focus on what it should be focusing on, and it's more interested in trivia. It's followed by the classic "TV is bad for your eyes" animation, which is one of the best ones by Terry Gilliam. I have one of my favourite sketches, the cheese shop sketch, which again is just ridiculously absurd. Cleese and Palin. It shouldn't really work because it is essentially John Cleese just asking for all this litany of different types of cheeses and Michael Palin saying we don't actually have it. It shouldn't be funny, but I just love the cheese shop sketch. And then we have again another director being mentioned, Sam Peckinpah's Salad Days, which again is just classic physical humour, where a group of people in straw boater hats and pinstripe suits, a nice picnic, turns very bloody indeed. Episode 8 is essentially just one sketch of the cycling trip. This was essentially a story that had been written by Terry Jones and Michael Palin, pretty much for their own show. It was never meant to be used in Python. It's almost like an episode of Ripping Yarns. It follows Palin as this innocent / annoying guy who's going on a cycle trip and gets involved in this adventure with Terry Jones, who at various points thinks he's Clodagh Jones, he thinks he's Trotsky, he ends up being Eartha Kitt. There's nice gags about firing squads and things like that. But again, it's another example of Monty Python pretty much doing whatever they like. Obviously throughout this season the titles come in at various points during the piece. The show can end and then there's another 2 minutes and then there's another 3 minutes. It has like 3 endings. And in this episode it's an example of pretty much taking 28 minutes of an episode on one sketch essentially, or one short film. The next episode starts with buildings. There's buildings being built by characters from literature, a motorway built by characters from Paradise Lost. So again, it continues with their kind of high art kind of interests mixed with just complete silliness. There's a piece on capital punishment creeping into the police force and accidental hangings and electrocutions of criminals. Terry Gilliam makes an appearance in one of his own animations. Another classic sketch, which again probably shouldn't work but just does, is the Olympic final of the men's hide and seek, which is pretty much Terry Jones and Graham Chapman in Trafalgar Square, and Graham Chapman runs away and hides. The Olympic record is 11 years, 2 months, 26 days, 9 hours, 3 minutes and 27 seconds. And Terry Jones has to find him obviously within that time. The Night with the Chicken returns briefly. from earlier seasons. There's a kind of spoof space land or planet landing and planet Aljon, which is very silly and not always successful. Episode 10 starts with a sketch about Tudor Jobs, a jobs agency, which is actually just a front for a porn shop. And then there's Michael Palin's cop who comes in on a raid and ends up being transported to the 17th century. And he plays a character, Philip Sidney, who turns the Spanish Armada back. It's got boatloads of porn. There's an amusing little sketch with Michael Palin, who plays a nutter, who asks whether he's disturbing Carol Cleveland and John Cleese as they're having a nice lunch at a table. There's a wonderfully silly Is There episode of a debate show, whereas Is There Life After Death, and John Cleese is joined with 3 dead people, who obviously their answer is no to Is There Life After Death. The next episode has, again, one of my favourite sketches, which again shouldn't really work, which is Dennis Moore, who has his own song, who's a Robin Hood figure, but instead of stealing money from the rich to give to the poor, he steals lupins. And he has like 4 appearances during the episode as he slowly realises that lupins don't really help the poor, and he needs to start redistributing the wealth in a better way, but he can't quite get the hang of that. And even when the poor now become the rich, because he's stolen everything from the rich, the poor then complain about the quality of the silverware that he's bringing and the quality of the candelabra that he's bringing, which kind of leads to doctors stealing money from patients, which is a nice idea. Again, this is Curacao ambulances, as when the ambulance comes to get you, they just take all your money. There's a debate on, which is obviously not particularly relevant nowadays, but it was at one point, should there be a 4th TV channel, which is quite funny. There's the Ideal Loon exhibition, which again kind of follows on from Upper Class Twit of the Year. So we have, for example, Italian priests in custard, and an exhibit of the Royal Canadian Mounted Geese. More Dennis Moore, and we have a quiz show, Prejudice, which probably they couldn't get away with nowadays. Turning the page, episode 12 is a moving story about the Queen's Own Kamikaze Highlanders, which goes on a whole thing of no time to lose and how to use the phrase no time to lose, which doesn't really work. There's a wonderful 2001 reference by Terry Gilliam's animation for all you Kubrick lovers, where the bone turns to the spaceship in the famous cut, and then the spaceship falls out of the sky and lands on the ape's head. There's a Spot the Looney quiz show, and there's a very silly battle for the microphone between John Cleese doing a documentary in the Highlands on Walter Scott, and Michael Palin wanting to do a documentary on the Forestry Commission, and they basically fight each other for the microphone, and it ends up in a car chase. It's quite amusing. Episode 13 actually has Thames TV doing the intro for a BBC programme, which we probably couldn't get away with now. The Oscar Wilde sketch with Graham Chapman as Oscar Wilde, which is very funny. Again, we have another art house director mentioned, Pasolini. Salo was 1975, so that was just a glimmer in Pasolini's eye. This is him filming the 3rd Test match, and there's, if you're used to Pasolini films, there's some Pasolini flashes in his film version of the 3rd Test match, and then Cleese appears as Pasolini being questioned by a bunch of Yorkshire cricketers. And then we have some grandstand additions, come wife swapping. There's rugby league, but they use a housewife as the ball. And this is all kind of framed around the Showbiz Awards, hosted by Eric Idle, pretty much doing a Richard Attenborough impersonation. And it's really a wonderful satire on that kind of sycophantic, simpering fakeness of award shows. It's, again, like I say, this season you can see why Cleese decided to leave after it. Personally, it's not as consistent as the second season. I think the second season is probably the best season, but it still has absolute gems in it. For example, the argument sketch, the cheese shop sketch. But you can see, like I said in the kind of intro, there is repetition happening. They are kind of going for longer scenes and longer sketches and telling stories more than just quick little sketches. Obviously, they were never really a punchline machine. There's more and more sketches that are just abandoned. So you can certainly get the feeling of perhaps they're running out of ideas a little bit, and you can see why this was John Cleese's last season. But let me know in the comments below, what's your favourite Monty Python season, what's your favourite sketch from season 3, and hopefully you'll join me for the inevitable season 4 random review. But again, if you're a fan, the standard versions are available, and again, I can't say enough about how good it looks, especially the outside stuff that's shot in film. It looks fantastic on Blu-ray. It's the best it's ever looked. So thanks very much for watching this random review of season 3, and hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.